Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming in such great numbers for what I hope will be a very exciting lecture. I'm happy to introduce Sanjeev Shankar on behalf of the Science and Society program here at NCBS. Sanjeev Shankar uses his training in design, science, and architecture to merge traditional craft-based knowledge with contemporary cultural and technological patterns to develop socially responsible, life-enhancing solutions. He has inspired and galvanized communities globally by walking this thin line between restraint and risk. Through rigorous field research and experimentation and an inclusive hands-on methodology, he continues to explore a critical and collective agenda for human ingenuity, challenging the way we live and impact our planet. A recipient of the Shevnik Fellowship for Science and Technology from Britain, the DA80 Fellowship from Germany. His critically acclaimed works have featured at the Royal Institute of British Architects in London, Center for Architecture in New York, the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago, and the Doors of Perception in New Delhi. He was shortlisted for the Emerging Architecture Award at the Royal Institute of British Architects in London and has won the 10 Great Ideas to Change the World competition. As part of our Science and Society program, I'm happy to invite Sanjeev to speak to us about resilience, the living root bridge technology pioneered by the indigenous Khasi tribes of Meghalaya. Thanks, Sanjeev.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? Barely? Am I audible? Yeah, great. Okay, apologize for the delay, and thank you for the introduction, and for inviting me here. I was invited as part of a conversation with Aparna over here, and we started talking about science and society. I've been fortunate to be part of different communities. As a human species, we live by our tags and names, and language and words are possibly the first bridges we build between people. Vocabulary is extremely important, and after some thought, I tried to capture what I have experienced over 10 years in few words. And one of the words which echoed was the word resilience, which means different to different communities. So scientists think of it differently, mathematicians, financial experts. But in contemporary parlance, resilience stands for capacity of a system to deal with change and continue to develop. I tried to delve deeper into this, and some of the words in this structure of definition which stood out for me were capacity, system, change, and the act of developing. By its very nature, the act of capacity resonates with something which is inherent or within a system. How do we define a system? Right now in this room, there are people who define themselves as individuals. A system, again, in contemporary discussions is defined as interconnected parts, where when it comes together, it's more than the parts. On the whole, what is change? From the point you entered this room to this point, to the point you will leave this room, we are not the same anymore. And who are we? It's a bit philosophical, but I try to bring in philosophy also in a scientific discussion, because a lot of questions are still unanswered. We are speaking in the National Center for Biological Sciences. Biology is defined on the holy grail of trying to understand what it means to be living, or what constitutes a living organism. When I stay with an indigenous tribe or a community, words don't matter. Their approach to the act of life is by instinct. And today you will see a variation of two different approaches to both word, to method, to thought, and thought being a material process. And finally, develop. What does it mean to develop? What does what constitutes development? When does something develop? Is it an anthropocentric view? Do as humans we decide what is development? As a society, what constitutes development? 50 years ago, we decided that compassion was good, racism was bad. 200 years ago, racism was the common thing to be done. As a society, we decided what it means to develop. So there's an act of collective thought. We become a collective and we live by it and we die by it. So I thought of trying to bring together a personal viewpoint of what resilience would mean. And so there's the tangible side to it, but I feel there's also the intangible side to it. By intangible, I mean something which you can't really pinpoint through all empirical data. Material would constitute the first, maybe, leap or bridge for defining resilience. Material or matter. And here both living and non-living systems, tangible and intangible systems. And when we go to the tangible side, of course, morphology. Morphology as part of biological systems is an important aspect of the discourse, whether we talk about self-organizing behavior, self-adaptability, geometry, or structure. And there's a bridge. So these two are connected. And then there's the environment, which is the context. But I bring in consciousness, which is the other side of it, which is the intangible, which actually perhaps is the guiding force for what defines a system to be living or non-living. What do we mean by consciousness? Different mediums of understanding or investigation define consciousness differently, but some of the words which stood out for me was cognition, potentiality, and most importantly, intent, intentionality. And this goes into senses. Everyone here in this room is using 5 senses, perhaps, to understand what I'm trying to say, and I'm communicating it through words. But everyone in this room, again, is interpreting it in their own extremely subjective manner. And that is where senses come into the picture. And yet, we define collective terms, collective ways of thought, collective intelligence, and collective processes. What was the collective feeling in this part of the world 100 years ago, as compared to what would it be 25 years from now? What were our collective fears? Does the tribe in Meghalaya feel, perceive, process information in the same way as us? There may be a bridge, and yet what is it? And in between all this, there's the thought, and thought is a material process. And at that point, we end up creating structures or patterns. And very soon, this starts getting complex, where we go into issues of time and space, mind and body, boundaries. What constitutes boundary? Even though all of us know everything is interconnected, and in nature everything is, as you will see in some of the case studies which we'll share later, what constitutes boundaries and what are the limits of these boundaries? And finally, how does all this come together? So this was my understanding of resilience in terms of some of the inputs. A lot of this in terms of ecology, social resilience, environmental resilience is talked about in common parlance. And then there is this, the culture and the society. And if we go back, how do we interpret this? So I brought out some case studies from my work, both ongoing, both from the past and both perhaps in the future, of trying to understand and communicate this understanding. So we start with some case studies from the social and cultural domain. And then we will go on to some case studies in the non-living and finally in the living domain. Now, in one of the discussions and scientific papers which I was reading about resilience, an important aspect which stood out was a simple thing about the breadth and the depth of what constitutes resilience of a system. And this could be a forest, this could be a cell, this could be a conversation, a relationship, this could be a building. or a habitat. Now over here, if this is declared as the envelope or the environment, at this point, we can call it a pretty safe zone as the strength of it. As we start approaching this critical threshold, we are reaching a point of precariousness. That's how they define it in terminologies. And after that, we are in a situation of collapse. We may call it death. Some other individuals call it collapse. And this is where is an interesting point for me personally, because some of the case studies I have worked with have tried to look at systems which are going towards collapse and maybe create a little point, a little intervention in my own capacity of what could bring it back. And some of the case studies we'll look at are somewhere over here. And maybe as a society, as a city, we can all decide where we are, because we all have opinions and we all are thinking individuals. The first project is from 2008. It's a public art project, and it's called Jugaad, which is a Hindi term for improvisation. And in this specific project, I would like to highlight the two parameters which we talked about in the first graph. One is thought, the way we think, and second, consciousness, apart from material, of course. And the third is limits. What constitutes the limit of something? This is the image which captured me. And then I saw this. These two images come from the same society. And for me, as a material person, I started looking at this oil can, which is everywhere in North India. And I started thinking, is this all that there is to this? And most people around me said that this is all there is, that it is used for a specific purpose and it cannot be used for something else. And we thought, what about taking that a little further? What about taking the theme of sustainability, which has also become a rhetoric and a political statement nowadays, but what constitutes that word? I think most importantly, it's the way the brain works. It's the way we think, whether we create multiple meanings, multiple functions, or we see more to what that there is. So we decided that we will scavenge for 1,000 cans and we will explore it. So as a human mind, we become curious about something, and that curiosity overtakes us more than anything else. And before we could do this, there was a phenomenal amount of resistance in the community, to the point that no one wanted to be with me, no one wanted to touch these cans, because they thought of it as dirty, as waste, as worth nothing. So the human being attaches value to something. We may attach value to research in quantum physics, astronomy. But if I ask for some amount of money for research in the oil can, I don't know which government or which individual would give me money for that, because we do not see potential in that. And that is where I felt that this transformation happened. So from the first image where all these cans were filled with garbage, we tried to create something which was beautiful, which had a function. And we tried to go further. So this is a small clipping which I could capture while doing the process, but you will see And then we created this. So there was a process, there was an attempt. And every time I see this, I feel something changed, not just within me, but in the community. And this is an important part of the process. People who saw nothing in it or saw no potential suddenly started seeing potential in the same can. Economically, the value went up from 0 rupees to about 80 rupees per can. And that became a good parameter because we use the parameter of economics a lot in our parlance. What constitutes worth or value in our society is nowadays measured a lot in economics, and justifying that to the government is an important part of the conversation because practically every single decision comes back to value. Is it worth pursuing? Could I have explained that project rationally at the beginning? I must confess, I would not have been able to explain it. And so the project began without explanation. The next case study in the social cultural domain, which I want to share with everyone, is about weaving. In contemporary parlance, again, weaving is defined as a versatile method of joining components, where optimal resistance to loosening is provided by friction. I find this definition or the act of defining something interesting. Aparna tried to define me or give a portrayal of who I am, what I have done. But does what I do define me as a person? Perhaps not. The word versatile goes back to resilience. The word optimal, which we will discuss later, because optimality has become an important part of value again. Structural engineers use it, mechanical engineers use it. We use it in biological domain where we say, are all living systems optimal? Perhaps not. We use redundancy as a strategy. So where do we see weaving? We see in baskets, we see in our clothes, we see in hair, we see in shoes. So where in the graph, which we started early on, does this craft or thought or process or knowledge lie? In the graph, there's no documentation of this craft. It is about, people say it's few centuries old. It could be anywhere between 500 to 1,000 years old, maybe more, maybe less. So what persists or what exists persists. There's a reason this has existed, and there's a reason we are listening to it today. And yet it's dwindling. So often my trigger is either a concern or something beautiful, and I see value in it. And I become disturbed when others don't see value. And this project started in 2005, October 2005, and there was an article in Times of India. And I thought I'll do something about this, and it became a journey in itself, which is still ongoing. This element over here, which you see, would have taken about few decades, maybe few centuries to become so optimal. It uses minimum material. It's the most critical aspect of the Kolhapuri footwear. Kolhapuri footwear, the authentic process, has medical benefits. It heals. And when you go into the process, you understand how they work with it, if you talk about authenticity. From here, we try to make that. And we started by looking into the semantics and syntactics of all of it. At one point in the discussion, I realized I was going into a knowledge domain which had not been described in words. I was asked to make videos to document this by the government of Karnataka. At one point, while I was doing the videos, the woman who was weaving, and there's no distinction between work and play because she's weaving and breastfeeding, there's no office and home. I asked her how many holes does she make in the process. So this is a weaving technique to join the upper to the sole, and we design new tools, new hardware, everything. But today when I look at this project, I was trying to understand a body of knowledge which originated differently. which processes differently. And I, as an outsider, was trying to go in and sensitize myself and work towards bringing it back into that original graph which we shared, where it comes back from the point of precariousness into something which is of more value. We ended up making this, and there was a lot of biology or physiology of the foot involved. So I got into trying to understand the biomechanics of the foot, spent a lot of time with men and women trying to understand what they think of their feet, what problems they have, how does it work, how does the entire body weight come down to 5 foot pressure points, and then respond to it. An important aspect when I look at this today, when I revisit it today, in today's time, and today as a time as a metaphor, time as a mechanical way of looking at things, the aspect of feedback. I think it's extremely important when we look at feedback and how everything is linked. I became a medium to do this project, but there were maybe so many people in the village, so many people in Bombay, and so many people outside who gave me feedback. And I think what I may be looking at today is feedback. Biological systems work in their own way, where they bumble along and you have feedback from environment or forces. And here the feedback was from the people and the process itself. I'll share a small video which shows the process of this. And then we move on to a different aspect of weaving. This was in Northeast India, in Nagaland. And it happened within a span of 8 months. So I was weaving in Nagaland and doing construction robotics in Germany. And I started seeing some patterns which we usually may not come across. I found it very binary. I found zeros and ones in weaving. I found my brain asking me, why is this not valued as much as robotics? I started asking, is knowledge in my hands or in my brain? I started asking, why do the weavers make mistakes when I ask them, how many holes do you make? Or how do you weave? For the first time, they make mistake. We did a series of designs. This project looked into the socio-cultural domain. Northeast is losing out to China and Southeast Asia. So I started working as a social entrepreneur, trying to create demand for things which are losing out in the market. Here, the feedback was the material. The material is giving me feedback. The context, very remote context from any city or town. And of course, a different part of my subconscious giving me feedback. A series of explorations. And whenever you work with a knowledge domain or a thought or a process, materiality, which has carried on for centuries, and you try to make a change, do something different or new, there are a lot of mistakes because you are coming from a point of difference. You are coming from a different approach. So we went into modularity, alternative materials, topology, changing the morphology itself. And what would it do to the material and the process itself? I tried to push this further. I tried to see what is the limit of this? What can I do? People said, no, this is weaving, you take it to the point of basket and that is it. This project then took me to London as part of the Chevening Fellowship for Science and Technology. And it was interesting because I tried to take the same process, but see what is the limit in terms of scale. What you see here is a 15-meter long timber strip. When we weave at a scale of cloth or handlooms or shoes, threads, yarn, there's no limit because it's pretty long. When you go into architecture, it's a difficult and a different process because scale becomes extremely important with issues of mass, versatility, stiffness, elasticity, Young's modulus, everything coming into the picture. So we did empirical tests and we tested it for failure. At what point does it fail? And there's always some tension between where you can push it and what is the opposing force. And in this case, for weaving, to make a structure like this, it should bend. So the radius of curvature is a critical aspect of it. And yet, for strength, we need thickness. The more thickness there is, the less it bends. But we needed bending. So there's a point where you negotiate and you find the balance, and that becomes the limit. And we try to simulate in the context of, in this case, external vibrations. In this case, this was for earthquakes in Uttarakhand. And I was invited to see what happens in that part of India, in the Himalayas, where we have landslides, flash floods, and earthquakes. You have all three situations where the region is prone to. So we started looking at how weaving, or the act of friction-based interlocking joints, could be used and be valued for something which it hasn't been used for. When we actually did analysis, it gave us results in simulation, and this is finite element analysis using Strand, where we found that it does perform in the context of external vibrations. So again, what was the feedback here? The material, the function, and force. The structure over here became a function of all of these and many more. We created a prototype to validate our findings, and the span of this is about 25 meters without any joints. So all of these joints are held by friction. There are no fixed joints. And for those of you who have seen damages in the context of earthquakes or flash floods or landslides, you would see that a lot of Indian temples use scarf joint. And the same scarf joint went through Buddhism to a lot of other countries. And all these joinery systems, in this room itself, we have all fixed joints. So a scarf joint or an interlocking joint works very differently from a fixed joint. This is a pagoda. They use a similar system of interlocking joints. And I took the same joinery system and tried to change the morphology and the function to try to see what is the limit of it, where and how far can it go. In biology, if I try to learn as an architect, as a scientist, or a designer, things work differently than what we think of as efficient architectural systems or engineered systems. There's a lot of redundancy. Possibly there are no joints in the way we think of it in architecture. This is a micrograph of a trabecular bone tissue. And when we look at bone, and a lot of research is being done on the bone, and this was part of a research project with some very interesting scientists in New York, where we were looking at the bone and plant tissue at the scale of micrometers and nanometers. Plants are very interesting because, and now, by the way, we are going into the biological domain, so now we are looking at living systems. So earlier we looked at the socio-cultural domain, and now we are gradually moving into the domain of biology. And if I look at this image, so I started with this image, I got fascinated 10 years ago, and it changes with time, with years. The more I see it, the more my mind sees differently. So it's cellulose, and using hierarchies, geometries, the same material which is extremely weak is made to perform differently for many different functions. This is the fiber arrangement in the human femur. As an architect, I start seeing tension and compression in it. And there's a lot of knowledge related to fibrous architecture which can be picked up from biology. And I'm extremely interested in picking out the mathematical logics in biological systems and try to incorporate it in architectural systems. Using architectural materials, I have still not gone into soft matter or plant material, which will come hopefully later. I just try to write down some of the points which biological systems are seen to echo and have, which are more or less different from conventional architectural systems which we create. So there's a lot of redundancy in biological systems. There are fluids. There's a fantastic role for fluids in the bone picture which you saw before, which is both used for dampening and also to create poroelasticity. So we are looking at anisotropy, heterogeneity, a lot of performance variability depending on the external force. So the morphology becomes a function of the force. Whether it's bamboo, if you look at the microstructure of bamboo, the cell structure starts changing as you go up. And that's how it performs so well. It becomes slender as it interacts with the wind. One of the projects which we worked with, and this is a short 4 or 5 month project, I am extremely interested in deployable structures in contexts which need such structures. So this is the earthworm, and we started looking at what, as an architect, we could pick out of it. So in terms of basic structure, and this is being explained in a very short time frame, so I apologize if I'm losing any information in communication. So we have the fluids, we have longitudinal muscles and circular muscles. We finally have a skin membrane, and we have a helical fiber system. Now, fascinatingly, the helical fiber system is used in a lot of hydrostatic structures, earthworms being just one of them. Within the human body itself, we have a lot of those. As an architect, I started creating simulations to actually see what can be done in architecture. So these are some of the models which we created. An important angle which comes out in the case of earthworms, I'm trying to say earthworms, and the word which is coming out is earthquake, but it should be earthworms. At 54.73, the angle is stabilized in this case, optimized for the earthworm. I'll play a small video. This model looks very simple, and I wish I could show you the physical. The videos are not working, so I have to always go back and play it again. But I will show it. This one. Okay. Fantastic. Oh, there's one more. So what you saw was a very simple helical arrangement of the fibers in the earth form. And then we picked the same mechanism, in a way, tried to change the material and change the trigger or the force. In that case, it was the hand, the human hand, and now it became a powered system. And we are still dealing with only materials which architects use. So we started from there, and we started going into the geometry. We started creating more systems, and it's still a component, and component is a term which is an important vocabulary. And we created this. The force is still the human hand in this case. But it started with that arrangement. And then we started thinking of where can this be applied, or what could be the optimal use for it in architecture, because architecture works slightly differently from biological sciences. And we tried to think of a site, and you're looking at a scale which is very different from a micro or a nano scale. And what are the challenges which come into this? This project and this research has gone to the point of prototyping. And in all cases, so we come back to the definition: capacity of a system to deal with change and continue to develop. Where are we today? We are in India. And what are our challenges? Poverty. We have 216 million rural poor. I don't mean to use the number as an important aspect of a discussion, but we do have a substantial population. Again, all the information we get is from external sources. But when you see poverty, it's a very different situation. This source is not from books or newspapers, but it's from a discussion. What does poverty do? On one hand, I'm an architect, I'm a scientist, I'm a designer with all the qualifications. But what does poverty do? It's directly impacting the environment. And I don't say I don't impact the environment and urban Indians do not impact the environment. But in specific cases, poverty and environmental degradation is coupled, is linked. There's a nexus. How do we challenge, alleviate this nexus? Where does it lead to? We have poverty and we have population growth. And we have hunger. And the complexity increases. We have issues of livelihood, behavior, policy. And as an architect, most construction and infrastructure projects work differently. We do not think of the communities we are working with. We go with a centralized solution which is taught in schools, which brings us to the point of education. What constitutes education? It is different from literacy. And where is craft in all this? Because we don't see value in that. And this is what we get. So this is our context. And my question to everyone is, what is our resilience? Where are we today with reference to this? As scientists, as human beings, as men, women, architects, where are we? What is the capacity of our system to cope with change and continue to develop? I don't have a number because numbers don't matter. It's an open question for us all. Because we all struggle with this, it's good to just put it out openly. And it keeps increasing. I tried to capture this, and at the end of it, I realized there is much more I may have left out than what I have put in. And maybe a lot of graphs in Brazil, in Africa, in parts of China, which they don't tell us, look the same. Even parts of America. If you go towards the other end of Chicago, which is not the Millennium Park, you start seeing the same. If you go towards those parts of Brussels, which no one talks about, you see the same. Which brings us back to the same graph. So, my dearest colleagues and friends, where are we? As an architect, I see this. I'm part of a building community, and I'm trying to build and build and build to survive, to make money. And I do this at the end of it. Now, do I, as a species, have any right to be complicit in this condition, is my question to everyone. Is this building sustainable? Is this building, which has been done by a dear friend, sustainable? Is the work which I showed you before sustainable? The answer and the hard truth is no. The oil can canopy, which has been awarded so many times, is not sustainable because one gentleman, who's a dear friend, asked me, Sanjeev, this has become so popular. Now everyone will start buying oil cans. Do we want that? This is in Nagaland. This is the Zuku Valley of Flowers. You reach here after a 12-hour trek, and the landscape changes from wild tropical forests to wild bamboo. This valley blooms once a year. And when you live in this valley, you feel differently when you live in the city. And I'm not being opinionated, I'm just throwing it out in the open. Because ultimately that valley will become like this. Sorry, I'm putting the pointer on the other side. This valley will become like that. In 2007, I started farming. There's a place in Kerala, the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary, and I started farming there for a while, orchids. And there was a point when I saw the staghorn fern plant, which was hanging. And I came up with this concept of a green brick, which was part of the competition from IIT Bombay. What is the green brick? I started thinking of a system which is part botanical and part structural. A lot of South Indian wells in Kerala use laterite. These are wells which are 100 to 150 years old, where there's no separation between the outside soil and the inside. The porosity allows the water to flow in and out like a fluid mechanism, just like our bones. And when you go deep in that well at about 30 feet to 50 feet, and one day I can show you those videos, there's a remarkable change in the microclimate. You have different types of biota at that point. This was an illustration, and as artists, as creative people, we always use metaphors. Illustrations help us, make us believe. You need something to believe. Series of illustrations done in 2010. There were a lot of questions in the audience. People said, as engineers, as civil engineers, we want nothing to do with plants inside our home. What about snakes and spiders and ants? And I had no answers. I still don't have all the answers. This is a surai. In India, we have matkas. We used to drink from matkas. Now it's different. But I started thinking of the surai, and some of the initial prototyping just looked at the surai. It's a capsule using simple act of pottery, and there's a particular village in North India which is very good in using earth. They work by instinct and hand. If you think about the science of it, they may not be able to explain much. But if you ask them to do something, they'll be able to do it after a few attempts. So the process here is reverse. There's water on the inside, there's non-fired clay on the outside. There's a certain pattern created so that the seeds adhere to the surface. As the temperature and the sunlight and the climate is right, just when it is right, the potentiality emerges and the seeds sprout. This is where this is, and it will go on. And this is where this is. So that is at the scale of my hand. This is in a village called Nongriat. It ranges in span from 65 feet to 85 feet. Ficus elastica, which, by the way, and Dr. Vishwanath is sitting here, he will validate that. The ficus species is being chopped down in Karnataka, in South India, and in Northeast now, because it grows and grows and grows. So when you want land, when you want agriculture, you want to chop down anything which grows so fast. But this is what happens when people and plants come together. My dear friends, this is what they create over a period of 15, 20, 25 years. And yes, the critique often is, where is the time? Who has the time to wait so long? But when you live here and when you observe this process and the way they converse with it, converse not in the way we understand. So we started in the process where there was no biology in terms of how I was interacting with material. It was a one-sided effort in what you saw in terms of dynamic systems, canopy, so on and so forth. There was no mutualism, there was no symbiosis there. And this is not symbiosis, as one of my friends tells me, this is mutualism because of what happens in the process. Scale is important. And this, again, there is no scientific documentation, but after documenting 11 of these bridges in extremely remote parts of Northeast, especially Meghalaya, I feel there's something phenomenal about these structures. And you walk on this, and you can walk, and by your walking, by your intervention and interaction with the aerial roots, you create these bridges. You meaning the Khasi tribes. These are indigenous tribes, these are matrilineal societies, land is owned only by the women. 80% of Meghalaya is privately owned by communities. So there is a sense of socio-ecological resilience, and this is where I wanted to bring in this term, because there is the science, which Aparna was telling me about, but there is the society. And where these two merge is an interesting point of potentiality. Why is this important? There's no environmental damage, minimal material and maintenance cost. There's no money exchanged. And I can show you other bridges, which are suspension bridges, where money is invested to the tune of 3 to 5 crores, which are collapsing in that torrential rainfall. There's carbon sequestration, progressive increase in load-bearing capacity, similar to bones. When you walk on aerial roots, they respond back and they grow. So the more you walk, the more it grows. Remedial properties on surrounding soil, water, and air. And it's a keystone species. So ficus is a keystone species. And there's a lot of literature on this, very little on Ficus elastica, but in general, ficus has been validated to be a keystone species which supports rainforest regeneration. Exceptional longevity. The bridges you just saw are anywhere between 80 years to 200, 300 years. There's no test, there's no validation. When you talk to the tribes, they talk in terms of generations, because you don't live to actually see the process conclude. It is independent of my life, my death. It carries on. So it liberates you from what you think is the story of this life. There's collective grassroots involvement. which is an important and essential attribute of this process, but also a risk. Because if you don't have humans in this, the system collapses. Migration is a threat. In terms of resiliency, this area is prone to storm surges and flash floods. There are no hydrological tests on this, but scientists have conferred that it's an area which is extremely prone to environmental disturbances. It supports other plant and animal systems. I have seen orchids growing on this, mushrooms growing on this. And most importantly, there are many more points which I don't know about. Finally, what are we trying to do? After 3 years of reflecting on this experience, we are trying to create a technology research and demonstration center on site in Meghalaya, in Revai village, where there's a mature bridge which is about 15 feet wide by 120 feet long, somewhere about 100 years old. On one hand, there's deforestation and these species are being cut down, and there's soil erosion along 8,000 square kilometers of Meghalaya, which is below 600 mean sea level. So Ficus elastica can grow below 600 mean sea level, and that entire belt in Meghalaya along the riverside, the stream side can be protected. On the other hand, scientific investigation is required to pick up this technology, to understand it. We don't even understand how this is happening. There's discussion about inosculation, there's discussion about aerial root growth, gravitropism, but as a human mind, we still do not know how it happens. Today, I am in the place of fundamental research, in a way, of biology. And I thought it's conducive to share this vision over here. So this is the Revai Bridge, and that is the scale you're looking at. So this is the vision, or the initiative. Along 8,000 kilometers, you appropriately plant Ficus elastica at two ends. And over here, you see time. So that's year 1, year 3, and this is also the process they follow. Year 6, you have Areca cachu aerial root guidance systems, again a local plant which is used a lot, and there has to be a relationship between why they use Areca cachu and Ficus elastica aerial roots, and the cell structure of it, and what would it do to have growing population and vehicles around this. What will mechanical disturbances, perturbations do to this species is not known. Finally, you have aerial root inosculation by year 15, and you have load tests. So as the structure starts picking up load, there's a critical threshold where you start testing it for load, not very different from suspension bridges or the way civil engineering, structural engineering, mechanical engineering works, or in other ways very different from how all of these domains work, because you don't construct, you allow it to grow. So the load test mostly uses soil, boulders, dead timber. And finally, by year 25, we should get this. So along 8,000 kilometers of that stretch, we will have rural connectivity. And Meghalaya, like so many parts of Northeast and so many parts of India, including the Western Ghats, the Andamans, rural connectivity, or the simple act of connectivity, is a very important part of poverty alleviation, because it connects you to the other side and it opens up products and services which otherwise you don't have access to. There are stories of people dying because of flash floods. And by the way, it is very different from a bamboo bridge, because most bamboo bridges cannot survive the torrential flash flood and storm surge which comes in. And that is where resilience comes into this specific project. Concluding, living root bridges would hopefully ensure socio-ecological resilience and lead to a lot of other parameters. And these are just some of the parameters with scientific discoveries and a feedback loop where the discoveries will inform the community plantation and you optimize and improve the growth process. So maybe it grows in less than 25 years. Maybe if we optimize the bamboo scaffold, it will grow in 15 years or 20 years. And you can impact the environment, health, and human behavior. And finally, in terms of fundamental research, we are looking at a new domain of living plant-based construction. And you have ficus species on this campus too, which I see every time I walk in. And these are the communities which you are working with. So these are communities who are having this instinctive knowledge in their hands, in their bodies, in their consciousness. But somewhere in the process, they are losing links with it and they are ready to chop down the same tree, which otherwise is held sacred. And I thought this picture captures what happens when life merges. I'll conclude with this video. I want to conclude with the information that we are now trying to create an alliance or a consortium of all people who are interested in this initiative, in whatever capacity, as scientists, as volunteers, as human beings, and everything is available on this website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for a really wonderful talk. Any questions for Sanjeev?
So Sanjeev, in terms of coming back to definitions, you're also an architect, right? And you said you build with these green bricks. So what the tribes have been doing, the Kasi tribes have been building bridges with so-called green bricks, or green elements. So does that in any way inform the kind of architecture you do in an urban environment, or in an environment that you want to change or modify?
Well, so the Khasi tribes, what they are doing is not with green bricks. They are doing with aerial roots of Ficus elastica.
But then what isn't the concept of a living brick the same as
yes,
the concept of
in some way, I see a link between what I was thinking and proposing and experimenting with and what this knowledge is trying to do or has done. Urban or rural is an important aspect of it, and initially I felt that, and this is in discussion with many scientists, bureaucrats, politicians, farmers, over a period of 3 years. Because I think we can think of something as one mind, but what I experienced as an individual was when you share this with many different people, it brings in the issue of reality and practicality. Because as architecture, as infrastructure is a very practical domain. And more often than not, you always get that challenge. So the opportunity initially lies in the rural connectivity project in that area. And if that becomes a pilot project for tropical socio-ecological resilience, because that's a tropical area and we have ficus as a very common tropical species across the world, that could become a model. And we hope to learn through this model, through this growth and the challenges, to what extent can this technology be optimized, transformed, translated to other environments. So one of the, it's an important aspect is Ficus elastica the only species? So we are thinking of Ficus bengalensis, Ficus religiosa, but religiosa does not have aerial roots. So there are a lot of questions in that sense. But rural connectivity, and that is in discussion with the Meghalaya Basin Development Authority, and they work with water catchment areas, soil conservation, rural development, and so on and so forth. And also because this is a knowledge which is being practiced right there, it would be a good place to start out. And if these people, the Khasi tribes, can then become engineers, social engineers, green engineers, they could then come maybe to Bangalore and change the way our area, our open areas look. And let's start with open areas, because a building is a different morphology with a different functionality. And in this context, we are talking about morphologies related to bridges, staircases. They have created entire mountainsides using aerial routes. So you don't walk on concrete or any of those things, but you are walking. So it's a materiality which has a potential in terms of morphology. Whether it can become a closed envelope system, I don't know. But I hope with time, the idea of the green brick and this idea may merge or may not merge. I don't know. But this is a start, and there's a whole corresponding impact analysis which can happen if that stretch is replanted using this. Because these are specific villages which are extremely remote and vulnerable. So you bring those villages as part of both the scientific demonstration, research, and also the planting, and later on the process itself. Because the investigation will have to be in situ to a great extent, because Ficus elastica in Lal Bagh or somewhere else will give a different material reading within a degree of error. And yet I thought it's an open conversation, so what would qualify? And I'm sure if the environment of an urban society or the urban realm has at least minimum threshold conditions for that kind of plant growth, I hope that that can happen. But if it grows in that graph outside and it becomes extremely polluted, which is also one of the risks of this technology, and which is the reason the bridge is held sacred or maintained. And you saw that very grainy video where, because if they have to use the bridge, they have to maintain the soil, the water, and the air. The boundary does not end with the building or with NCBS campus. If Bangalore collapses, NCBS will not stay. So I think that, and the way the worldview, again, of the Khasi tribe is very different in the way they think of themselves and collective societies. So there's also that aspect of it. So it's a different process, and there is a fundamental difference in the way they do this. other than the issue of time, of course.
Sanjeev, it was extremely interesting and it was quite an eye-opener for me, especially that Ficus elastica could be used in such a manner. We have been working on Ficus species in Monday, as you might be aware, and Danya is also sitting with me. We were discussing quite a bit about it. I believe that with Bengalensis, we could really be, able to reconstruct such a kind of living bridge in Karnataka. Western Ghats, you could even do it, that Kaveri stretch, that Kanakpura area. It is quite possible in 10-15 years you should be able to do Bengalensis. That's my question.
So Ficus elastica is a latex producing species, and could you explore that angle, because you have listed a number of benefits to the community from this species, and I've heard that before rubber was introduced and rubber plantations became popular in India, this species was commercially exploited for its latex too. So do you have any idea of what the community is doing in that angle? Are they?
Well, in my experience, when I have lived with them, there are a series of videos which I could share and articles, but latex coming from Ficus elastica is a poor quality rubber. That is one of the things. But it is possible to use it for different things. In that society, they are using it to create traps for birds, for animals, deep in the forest. And you have to think of these tribes not living in this kind of environment. Many of them survive deep in the forest. So instinct, survival, living in that way, that's what they use Ficus elastica latex for. There's a lot of use of the leaves for fodder in that sense and as a resource. I haven't done a study of biota, which is really there, but a lot of photography and cartography, which I have done, will show you examples of a lot of plant and animal biota, which is being supported and growing on these bridges. Other than the butterfly, which I'm ending with, but there are a lot of mushrooms, and orchids is a possibility. So in discussion with the Meghalaya government, that came up, because orchids could also become a very important aspect of economy for the local people, because you suddenly start seeing things differently then. Because now there's a clash. A lot of these bridges, usually people don't know about this, but they are being chopped down because they want that land near the river, which is also a very fertile belt.
Well, thank you all for coming. There's a tea and refreshment served outside, so please help yourself. And another round of applause for this excellent talk. Thank you.